Is it mute? It's mute, no?
So the microphone, you do a microphone,
Okay.
and then we do this one.
It's not, yeah. Okay.
So Jonathan said we can wait 5 minutes max.
5 minutes, yeah. Yeah, we wait a bit because they were all talking outside. So I put it there?
No, you just
Very loud.
no, but it'll be on live stream if you speak.
Sorry.
So you just push the blue. So I think you're about 80.
Okay.
Anyway, you just push
And just put that
the
one.
unmute.
So, welcome everybody to the afternoon session. I'm very happy to introduce this session today, and thanks to OpenAIRE, who has funded this session in the afternoon, who are organizing it, Beth Park and Jonathan England from the University of Luxembourg. We have two external speakers, or let's say one from abroad and one from the University of Luxembourg, Lennart Martens and Professor Conchita D'Ambrosio. And both of them are talking each time 45 minutes, so we won't interrupt the sessions for questions. And I would ask you to take note of the questions, and we have a half-an-hour session where you can ask questions later on. So let me introduce the first speaker then, Professor Lennart Martens. He comes from the University of Ghent, and he's actually Professor of Systems Biology there. He also is a group leader in the Inter-University Institute for Biotechnology, which is, as I understand it, a consortium in Flanders called VIB as an abbreviation. He has obtained his PhD also in Ghent, while he moved then to the EMBL, European Bioinformatics Institute, where he headed the proteomics identifications database, PRIDE. And funny enough, it is the same abbreviation than our PhD program, PRIDE. This is a coincidence. And then he returned in 2009 to Ghent University. He has actually a number of board functions and editor functions, and has been selected for the Belgian Young Academy. Maybe you can drop a word on that as well if there is time, because of to motivate some young scientists to participate in these activities. And he has also received two prizes. One is the Proteomics Pioneer Award by the European Proteomics Association in 2015, and one is the Prometheus Award for Research Excellence by the Ghent University in 2014. So he will give us an overview in his talk on Do You Speak Open Science, about the changes that open science bring to the practices how we do research. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this kind introduction, and for the chance, of course, to speak here a bit about open science and some practical tips and guidelines on how you can make open science work for you, why I think it's important to make it work for you, to make it work for everyone. But because I was asked to say something about the Young Academy, to be honest, it's one of the most interesting and most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life. Is join this Young Academy in Belgium. It was started 5 years ago, and the first batch of young academicians is now retiring. I'm one of them, so I will be retiring from the Young Academy soon. Probably it's the receding hairline has now disqualified me for this, but it was a fantastic place. As one of my colleagues put it, he said that despite the fact that we are all employed at universities and we have a lot of meetings at universities, my colleague said that the Young Academy was the only place where he was never disinterested or disappointed by other people's comments. They were all very well and very nicely informed. So it's a great way to meet young, motivated people who want to make a difference. And then the second thing, of course, is you can actually make a difference. It's amazing how open people at universities, so the chancellors of the universities, the people who run the government, so the head administrators as well as the ministers, are to young people and to hearing young people in science who have been selected because they have a strong motivation to be engaged in this kind of stuff, how much they will listen to you. We're putting, for instance, together a meeting on open science in Belgium that has been, it will take place on the 8th of November with the Young Academy and the Belgian Department for Science and Innovation, which comes straight from the minister. So they really want to see what's going on, and they want to use us as a conduit to learn more about this. So if you ever have the chance to either create one of these or be part of one of these, I would very warmly recommend that this is the kind of place where you can make a difference. The downside is it is a bit of extra work. Okay, so back to open science. I actually, when I was at EBI in Cambridge, I built a database for sharing proteomics data. This was the PRIDE database. I did not come up with the name. If I had come up with the name, it would have been called Online Proteomics Data Sharing System or something stupid like that. I never have original names. My idea was to make that science of that field open. And at the time, I really felt a lot like this, not necessarily the knight in shining armors, but at least I was fighting dragons. It was very, very difficult to get this stuff established, and I'm very proud of the fact that every big name in the field shouted at me in a meeting like this at least once, because they really did not like this idea of public data. So for a long time, you think you're fighting the good fight, you're trying to rescue the data in distress from the dragons. But I've recently come to realize that a lot of this is actually fighting windmills. If you look at the state of the field today, and I'll give you numerous examples, I would like to conclude from what I see that open science is a fact. Everybody who is involved in organizing scientific research and funding scientific research nowadays seems to think this is the way to go. So there is no more dragon. In fact, we now have a very strong responsibility to make it work. And this is why I would like to give you a lot of practical hints and tips on how to make this work so that you can participate in this open science that is coming anyway. There's no need to fight for it anymore, but there's a need now, an urgent need to make it work. So that's essentially my starting point is the real revolution is not making science open. The real revolution is once it is open, what can we do with this and how can you contribute to it? And that's the long and the short of this slide, essentially. Now, the talk is based to some extent on a manuscript we wrote. Note that I do not say a paper. You can see here that it's not been peer-reviewed. It's just a manuscript we put out on a preprint server. We'll come back to those. And you see where the title comes from, right? So, do you speak open science? It was written by an extremely good postdoc in my group, Paola Masuzzo. And myself, I helped a bit as well. And I would really recommend reading this if you want to know more, because it is a treasure trove of information and good hints and tips on how to do things and where to find even more information about subtopics. It's been reasonably popular. I made the screenshot a while ago. So a lot of people really do like this thing, and it has actually already had some influence on policy at the European Commission level. So we actually had a response that was bigger than we expected. And of course, it's freely available as an open access document on the web. You just Google the term, you will find it. Okay, so why do we have this whole open science discussion in the first place? Well, what most of you will see is that it is required nowadays. So the Horizon 2020 program really says open science is very important. You have to publish your articles as open access. You have to make your data publicly available and so forth. You need to have a data management plan. Some of you may have wrestled with one of these. On the other hand, you have the journals who also dictate a lot of what happens in our world. In my field, Nature Biotechnology is the predominant journal, and they essentially have an editorial that's already a few years old where they say, where are the data? So from now on, all the data has to be open. Sister journal Nature Methods, which in life sciences is also very big, they recently had an editorial where they say, we will accept no more manuscripts on software without the code being open. So they're really moving in that way. And then, of course, a lot of funders. So I put down some funders, NSF and NIH in the US, the Wellcome Trust, one of the big private funders in the world in the UK. FWO is the National Fund for Scientific Research in Flanders. ERC is also very strongly committed to open science because it's part of Horizon 2020. EMBO, of course. And then the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is the biggest private funder of science in the world, they deserve special mention because they came up with something really amazing. They recently announced that any work funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation can no longer be published in Springer Nature journals, in Elsevier journals, and in AAAS journals. So that means Cell, Science, Nature, you cannot publish there anymore. They prohibit it. The reason why they prohibit it is because these journals are not sufficiently open access. So when we talk about open access, I'll come back to that. But this is a very important domino. They're the biggest private funder and one of the biggest funders to court of scientific research and life sciences in general. If these guys say a lot of other guys will start to say A as well. So I think it's a matter of time before the Wellcome Trust, which is the other big private funder, will also go that way. If these two behemoths go that way, it's going to move the field. Because they fund some really excellent scientists, and if these guys are going to run away from Nature, Cell and Science, we're going to see a small revolution. So keep your eye on the ball there, because this is going to be impressive. Now, a second reason why some of you may think open science is a good idea is to detect fraud. This is just one example I came across, which is about nanoparticles. You see this larvae of a fish, and then it has plastic and macroparticles. You read a lot about microparticles that seem to be everywhere, including our drinking water. And these people studied whether that was detrimental. And of course, it turns out it's really bad for the larvae, so it's covered in every newspaper around the world. This kind of research has huge public impact. And then there was an expression of concern because this work was done at a research station at the seaside in Sweden, and there were other researchers doing different work at the same time present there, and they say, we didn't see any of these experiments. So these experiments that are claimed, we were there, we didn't see anything like this happen. So we would like to see some data to make sure it really did happen. And then you get this. The authors notified Science of the theft of the computer on which the raw data for the paper were stored. These data were not backed up on any other device nor deposited in an appropriate repository. So essentially the data had conveniently disappeared as soon as somebody asked for it. So to make a very long story short, but it's worth reading the story because there's a lot of layers to this story, but the final assessment after a review board, they were very damning for the institute, which essentially said, yeah, let the researchers go free. But then the review board ultimately said there's no ethical approval to be found, which of course you don't need if you don't actually carry out the experiments. That at least I think is correct. And then absence of the original data for the experiments, so the laptop was stolen. And then the widespread lack of clarity concerning how these experiments were conducted. Essentially nobody could figure out whether something had been done. And they retracted the paper in full and destroyed 2 careers in the process, of course, right? So this is what most people think open science is about. It's about catching the villains. Yeah. But I think that's very wrong. I think that's not the way we should think about open science for several reasons. The first thing is that open science can help prevent fraud, but it is actually not a silver bullet at all. So the previous paper was not discovered because of open science. It was discovered because people were there at the research station and figured out, yeah, but this didn't happen. Right? We were there. That's why it got caught out, for no other reason. If the data had been available, of course here it would probably have been impossible. It's not necessary that it would have been picked up if they falsified data. So that's my second point. Fraud is regularly detected anyway. They detect it even in the absence of data, in the absence of code, and from closed access, so behind paywall journal articles. Open science is not necessary to catch perpetrators. That is the kind of thing we do in science automatically, although sometimes it may take a bit of time before somebody takes a sufficient interest in that. So finally, my biggest motivation is as somebody who always fought for open science, why do we need to define it in a negative fashion? Why do we need to say you have to make everything available because otherwise we don't believe you? I don't think that's a really great way to promote something, especially not since there's so much promise in open science as well. So hopefully I can convince you of that throughout my talk. To give you a few pointers, open science makes your work accessible to as many people as possible. I think that should be important to us. I think we should be able to be happy when people read our work and use our work for something else. At least I am. It's probably kind of the best thing that can happen. You can, of course, build much more effectively on other people's work when you have everything available. It also maximizes the usefulness of your research. If your data is incompletely processed, if you do anything in the life sciences today, be it microscopy images, or be it sequencing data, or metabolomics or proteomics data, chances are you only really analyze in your papers 20–30% of the data that you have acquired. The rest you just can't process right now, so you forget about it. And it's bycatch, and you throw it away. But if you don't throw this away, that means that 70% of your data can now be looked at by other people, and they can do some pretty amazing things with that. Then, and this is a very controversial statement still for many people, but unfortunately it's been proven to be right time and again. That's this one. The data that you generate in your research, no matter what it is, will most likely have a much longer shelf life than the manuscripts you write around these data. Your opinions, your methods of analysis may become outdated very quickly, but unless the instrument you use to acquire your data becomes outdated, the data itself remains much more valuable. You can reprocess it with a new method. You can reprocess it for an orthogonal purpose. And you can do that long after any of your claims may have been falsified or proven to be correct or whatever happens. So data is really the primary product of science. And if we embrace that, then we should be proud of our data, we should take ownership of our data, we should share our data, much more than we do today. And then finally, I think open science does a really amazing thing in a group. I run a group that does nothing but work on open data. It really does foster an enormous amount of creativity, because suddenly all these doors are opened. Suddenly you can do things you couldn't do with a single data set, but you can do it with 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 data sets. You can start to think really big. And I think it will stimulate revolutionary research. It will allow you to do things that were impossible before. Now, enough of the background. Let's talk about the 4 basic pillars of open science. So I've listed them. I've got open data, open access, open code, and open peer review. I will spend the least amount of time about the last aspect, but we will talk about that as well. Most of the time will be spent on open data and open code, and a little bit about open access as well. And then I'll end with a final call to action. Now, when it comes to data, there are very nice principles outlined. They're called the FAIR principles for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. So these are 4 criteria that your data should be adhering to make sure that other people can reuse it. It makes sense. If they can't find the data, it ends there. If they can find the data, but it's in a PDF document of 7,000 pages, where you took an Excel table and printed it to PDF or scanned it, which would be even better, then nobody can do anything with this data, right? It's completely inaccessible. It's there, it's findable. You look at it and you say, okay, I'm going to need 5 years to type all of this over in an Excel document. That's not accessible, so that's a problem, so you need to make it accessible. Interoperable means that it's kind of standardized so that other people can actually plug it into their analysis pipelines. So if you have something in a binary format from a particular vendor who sold you an instrument, and people who want to read that file will have to go and buy the instrument in order to get access to the software that can read the file, it's not really interoperable. If you, however, condense this into a tab-delimited text file, everybody can do anything they want with it. They can load it in Excel, they can load it in R, they can do whatever they want. Okay? And then finally, reusable means that you've annotated it to the point that people understand what's going on. And you didn't just give them a bunch of numbers that says column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, and then go and figure out what these columns mean. Okay, so these are some simple examples of what you should look out for. Mind you, a lot of resources in the world already implement FAIR principles for you. They make sure that your data is fair as soon as you deposit it in these resources. So when you come across this, that a resource is fair, that it has compliance with these principles, such as, for instance, these, but there are very many more, most of these have a bit of a life science bias, then you automatically fulfill these criteria. They will make you fulfill these criteria, which is great because then you don't have to worry about it anymore. They will have guidelines and you just follow them and it will be fine. In general, when you share data, you need 3 things. You need to have sufficient data, which means that you tell people exactly what is necessary for other people to understand or reproduce your results. These are the minimum reporting requirements. So what do you need to tell us at the very minimum so that we can do something with your data? The second thing you need is you all need to speak the same language. So in biology, we have these problems like yeast to hybrid, which is a very common protein-protein interaction technique. That is written in 7,000 different ways, not counting all the possible spelling errors. For a computer, this is an absolute nightmare. But if you were to work with a dictionary in which yeast to hybrid gets a single name, and in fact that name is linked to a number, then you can very quickly find all yeast to hybrid data. So the use of these kind of common vocabularies is super important. Then again, in a country like Luxembourg, which has the same problem as a country like Belgium, where at least 3 languages and a few dialects are spoken, you understand the importance of common vocabularies, right? So if you don't have common vocabularies, there is no communication. So that's why these common vocabularies come back here at data level and turn out to be quite important. And then finally, you need to have standard formats. People need to know what the data will look like. How is it packaged? If it's a tab delimited file, what are the columns? What are the rows? If it's not a tab delimited format, but something XML-ish, how is that formatted? And the good thing is that person X can write a piece of software that can read that standard format. And then with that piece of software, you can read data from everyone that exports their data in this format. So it's a really great way to get at data without ever thinking about it. Usually in a field that is pretty mature in data sharing, the formats are invisible. You never come across them. If I send you a Word document, you don't really think that's not a standard format, but it's a standard format for Microsoft. If I send you that document, you can read it. If I send you a CSV file, you double-click it, it will open up in your spreadsheet or in a note block, and you will be able to read it. Okay, so you don't have to think about the actual formatting. Now, this metadata thing is usually really problematic. Metadata is the key missing thing. This is from the Pride repository, so this is actual real-life data. What you can see is that over time, so this is time, you can see the years if you're lucky, it goes from 2005 to 2015, so 10 years of proteomics data. What you will see is that the data holdings increase. More and more data accumulates in the repository. This is the annotation of the mass spectrometer, which is the most important instrument in the workflow. This is the name or type of the thing. And what you can see is that this is actually a very popular instrument. This one is not so popular. This one is reasonably popular. And this one is the most popular. So these are people who cannot be bothered to enter the name of the instrument at the time of submission. This takes 15 seconds, okay? This is tissue. This sounds like an important thing, right? Which tissue did the sample come from? Is it liver? Is it brain? Is it mouse? Is it human? Is it plant? Is it Arabidopsis? Is it E. coli? And then you can see unknown tissue is about as many as there are annotated tissues. So people literally can't be bothered to enter data. Now we try to reverse that trend. We built software that made it super easy for people to do this. So we got it down from 15 seconds to 3 seconds. And it was released at this point in time. It had 0 effect. Absolutely 0 effect. In fact, we noticed something when we did a posteriori quality control, that the instrument name, there were 13 instrument names that people could select from. 13 is not a lot, and they were in a drop-down box. You know, there's this box with a little arrow pointing down, you click it, and then it opens up a list, and you select one from the list. You have seen that before, right? So it had that. The most commonly annotated instrument was the first one in the list. This is scary. Yeah? And the first one in the list was not the most commonly used instrument by far, and we could detect this because the instrument leaves a fingerprint behind in the data and it wasn't there. So this is really, really scary. And then some of you may have noticed that at some point this unknown business goes down. So why does the unknown business go down? It's because of this. It's because of the Attila effect. I call it the Attila effect because the person who made this effect happen is called Attila Tzordas. He is a curator in the Pride team, and he has a full-time job of telling people that their data is not good enough. So people submit data, he goes through the data and then sends them an email, unless you provide me with the following information, we will not be able to store your data. So what we had to do in the Pride case is we had to police the data. We needed somebody with a big stick to stand at the entry of the database and reject anything that wasn't at least at base level annotated. This is sad because it is an enormous waste of resources, if you think about it. And the only reason why this worked is by the time that this came about, which is 2012-ish, the journals were mandating deposition of data. So if you did not get the data in the repository, you would never get a paper. And that really helped, because then the rejection of the submission functioned. You cannot do that when people are voluntarily submitting data. This is one of the reasons why it kept on being unpoliced. So to some extent, if you ever come across this, you have to understand that maybe you are a very nice person and you didn't mean any ill intent, but it just damages so much downstream if we don't know what things are about that we sometimes need to police. It's not to make your life miserable. It's to make everybody's life better. Okay, so here's a non-exhaustive checklist to ensure suitability of your data efforts. So do you explain your abbreviations? Do you have your metadata? See previous slides. Do you use standard formats? Do you have all your terms covered from a controlled vocabulary? You did not invent a new term for the technique you're using. So instead of Western blotting, you got tired of that, so you're going to call it flubbledy blotting. I mean, that is not a very productive thing to do, so you need to make sure everything is controlled. If there are missing data, do you explain them? So for mouse number 5, I don't have any data. Yeah, that's because mouse number 5 suffered from a cardiac arrest when the cleaning lady put the vacuum cleaner too close to the cage or something like that. That actually happened. Asked me during a coffee break or so. I have a hugely interesting story about a postdoc who wasted his entire career and the vacuum cleaner did it. It was not in my lab. And finally, am I using a trusted, long-lived third-party repository? Studies have been done on how long data lives in online when it's on people's own servers, when you just put it somewhere on your account at your university. Typically, stuff lives less than 2 years because most academics move after 2 years. PhD students, postdocs, they tend to move on 2-3 year cycles and the data disappears. That's why you need third-party repositories. Thankfully, there are very many of them, and I've shown you quite a few before, and in your field there must be some. And if there aren't any in your fields, your libraries will probably be building up something. And so you get institutional repositories, and these of course also live much longer than the average PhD position duration. Now, if you are dealing with sensitive data, patient data, identifiable data of any kind, you of course need to have the right clearances. You need to make sure that everything is right. Usually you want to ask this of the ethical committees in your country or in your university before you start, because you really do need to do this properly. And then there's lots of things that you have to care about. I won't go into the details. These slides will be available to all of you. You can use these checklists. I want to talk about the last bit. Does the data have a well-considered license? I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's this funny block here. This is not the logo of my group, in case you were wondering. This is a license. I license these slides explicitly under a Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license, version 4.0. So let's talk about licenses. When you license your content, well, actually, when you create content, if you do not license it, if you say, I'll put no license, the law worldwide is very explicit about this. No license means nobody can touch it. If I do not put that Creative Commons things on my slides, there's no way you can actually touch my slides, because I could sue you if you did, right? So you have to provide a license in order for people to be able to reuse it. The author is always crazily protected. You need to actually waive your rights. You have to tell people, I don't really care, you can have a copy. And so for that, there's a really great set of licenses out there, which are very warmly recommended to look into, which are the Creative Commons licenses. I'll start at the bottom. Why do I say use these? Because they're actually legally pretty sound, and they're used by Wikipedia and Flickr and a lot of stuff on the web. So these licenses are massively used by very big organizations that care about sharing data. So they're pretty solid, they're pretty good. I give you two that you should choose from. Don't choose any of the others. Typically, I'll give you two exceptions where you should definitely never choose one and why you should possibly choose another one, but these two are the most common. You can use attribution license, so by, that's not by, that's actually by whom, so in this case the slides are by me, so if you use them you're supposed to say I stole this slide from this guy. That's enough. As you do that, I'm happy. I get a reference. That's what we do in science, right? When you use something from me, you give me a reference. So that's essentially this. And it's any use you want to put it to. You want to take my slides and print them out in a very fancy book with a gold inlaid cover and then charge people €1 million for that book of slides? That's absolutely fine. You just have to say inside slides by me. Yeah? But then, of course, the price will go up when you say that. And so that's the only thing you have to do. There's no limits to what you can do with this data. You can take them, you can defame them, you can put funny pictures of me on them. Actually, that's portrait, right? That's something else. But so you could put little monkeys on that. You could do whatever you want, right? You can reuse it in any way you like. The share alike, on the other hand, is a little bit more nasty, and that's actually the one that I use here, because I'm a nasty person. You have to recognize me, but any derived work, if you put monkeys on this, and you want to share that with anybody else, you also must share alike. You must use the same license. I have just infected your work with my work. So if you take anything from me, you can still charge people money for it, but you should also license it for free. Because I mandate that. So this is a very big distinction. The BY is the default, or the buy is the default license where you just say, I don't care, do whatever you like, just acknowledge me. The share alike is a little bit more dirty. It says, if you actually use this, I think you should probably make that free available as well. Yeah? So that is a choice you make. For my slides, I tend to put this. I tend to put the share alike because I really don't like the idea of anybody making money off my slides. I think that would be crazy. But for the software code that we write in the group, we use a license. It's not a Creative Commons, I'll come back to that. But I use a license where people can make commercial derivatives, because there I think it makes sense. So you just make that choice. There are two other licenses that from Creative Commons that one is interesting, one is not interesting. The interesting one is CC0. It's written CC and then the number 0. This means free public domain. It means I take no right whatsoever. I dump this to the world and the world can do what they want. They don't even need to recognize me as the author. Yeah? It's like you write something on a note and you throw the note into a bottle in the ocean and you say, I don't care anymore. That's a CC0. That can be very useful. It's a public domain license. It's what all the copyrights resort to after an enormous amount of time after your death these days. And then the other one that you should avoid is the non-commercial license. There is a CC BY-NC and a CC BY-SA-NC, non-commercial, but that actually restricts a lot of stuff. Journals like to use this. I'll come back to this when I speak of open access. And it means that nobody can extract value that is potentially at one point commercializable from your work. It's a really big flaw in Creative Commons, and it means that if you want to say, for instance, take my slides and count the number of times I use the letter E, you cannot do that if I would have non-commercial, because I said, yeah, but my usage of E's is something that could potentially be used in a commercial context to identify other slides that I made and then make a compendium of all my slides and then sell access to that. So if I can come up with a Kukameni story like that, you're actually prohibited from using it. So this NC essentially means you cannot touch it again. So stay away from non-commercial. If you want to stop companies from making a lot of money, the SA thing is good, because they tend to not like that. then they always have to license the whole product that they make. Even if it contains only one image from one slide of mine, they have to make the whole thing free. So you want to screw a company, you put SA, don't put NC, okay? Very importantly, for those of you who write code, CC licenses are really, really bad for code. They are meant for content, not for code. I'll give you licenses for code in a few slides, so bear with me. Never use Creative Commons licenses for code. Everybody got that? Yep. I'll get back to that when I get to the open source software licenses. But that's a good question, yeah. You can, in fact, but it's very tricky. It depends. So, open access then briefly is about making your publications freely available. Most of you have come across this now because it's mandated in many ways. If you want to read a bit more about the background of how fun it is to be a publisher, I really warmly recommend this Guardian article. You find the link at the bottom. You can also just Google it. Staggeringly profitable publishing is a good way to Google it. It's a very interesting article about where our publication culture comes from and how the publishers make enormous amounts of money by playing the weaknesses in our psyche. Essentially, they want to make us feel elite, like an elite, like big boys or big girls, and because of that, they make us pay through the nose. And it works extremely well. As soon as you've written this, any grant review panel or tenure panel will suddenly look like a very strange bunch of animals. Unfortunately, I am on many of these panels myself, and yeah, it left a bad taste in my mouth. It still does, but it's definitely worth a read. I'll give you the long and the short of it. Elsevier's, one of the biggest publishers in the world, have a 36% profit margin. That actually beats Apple, which I've always thought were the absolute royalty when it comes to making profit out of very little. They beat Google, they beat Amazon. This is one of the most profitable businesses in the universe. This is very scary because it's all funded with public money. This is taxpayers' money that goes into the bonus of the guys who run these publishing houses. That's a bit scary in many ways. So there is something about going open access. Now there's three types of open access. There's gold open access, and it's really literally gold because you have to pay through the nose for this. If you get a paper in Nature and you want this to be freely available to the community, they'll say, oh, we can do that. That'll cost you, I don't know, $3,000 before tax for your article alone. And then, of course, if you're funded by Horizon 2020, you have an ERC grant or a collaborative grant, you have to pay that amount of money because you have to make it open access, right? So you do that. And then, funnily enough, the same issue of Nature will contain about 75% papers that are not open access. So in order for scientists to read what's in these journals, they have to get the library subscription anyway. Right? So Nature makes money twice. They make money off the poor people who pay for gold open access, and they still get the subscriptions. This is why the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have said, not anymore, not with our money. This is highway robbery. Either you make the whole thing open access, and then there are no more library fees, and then we'll pay for the open access, or, you know, we stop publishing in you. And the journal said, no, we like this because we make a lot of money, and then Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation said, okay, fine, we know what to do. So this is actually very bad. So I tried to stop. It's not always possible, but I tried to stop going gold open access. It just does not make sense. It's throwing money the wrong way. Yeah? The one exception is journals that are completely open access, because of course there you pay to run the journal. And that makes some sense because libraries don't have to pay for the journal. It's the people who publish. So that is kind of okay-ish. Okay? Thank God there is a second way of doing things, which is green open access. And that means that you deposit your work, which is your work. Yeah? You're the author. You should have the copyright. You deposit your work in a manuscript stage, usually the first version you want to submit. You chuck that in an online database, like Archive or BioArchive. I'll show you some others. And you can do that because the journal cannot claim ownership of your written work. What they can claim ownership of is the added value that they provide through peer review, because the editor handles that, right? That's a service they provide to you. It's not always a good service, right? Your papers do get rejected. And typesetting. Typesetting is also value they add to your manuscript. And so you cannot take your typeset manuscript, and very often you also cannot take your peer-reviewed manuscript and make that freely available. But you can definitely make your own work available. A lot of journals initially try to stop this by saying, if you've submitted it online, we will not even consider it. But, you know, there's a lot of pressure from the community, and now even the chemists, who have been very, very reluctant to accept this, have changed their minds. It's still a very, if you're a chemist and you read these reports in the Royal Society of Chemistry or in your local, the American Society, Chemical Society briefings, they still fight over this because they still don't want this, which I really don't understand. But this is a really great route because it makes your work immediately visible to everyone in the field, and you don't have to wait until the year that it takes nature to burn down your manuscript to get this whole thing out into the field. You get a stamp from a third-party repository that says on this date you submitted this. If you ever want to win a Nobel Prize, that's a big bonus, because the first guy gets the prize. So it's that's just a tip. We've done this now for a lot of manuscripts, and it was really great to do. It was a wonderful experience. Now, finally, there's delayed open access. This is typically the kind of deal that NIH makes with journals, where the journal owns your paper for about a year. And then after that year, it becomes freely available. So essentially, while it is hot and interesting, you have to pay. By the time it's old and out of date, people can read it for free. It's a reasonably bad deal. The green open access is a much better deal. If you want to find journals, there's a really cool tool online called Cofactor Journal Selector. You get the URL at the bottom, and you can set a lot of parameters. I played with this, it's really fun. You can set subject, peer review style, open access, and the cost for that, the speed of publishing, and all of these kind of things. And then you say search, and it gives you which journals in your field adhere to the following things. It's a super useful database to find journals to publish in if you care about how your things are published. Now, I talked about this green open access, and this is about making a preprint available, and there's many ways you can do that. There's PeerJ preprints, which I used in the past, which is really quite nice. It's got a beautiful web interface. I really like that. There's Archive for the physicists and the mathematicians have used this for many, many years. BioArchive is now out for biology-related stuff. There's ChemArchive for chemistry. There's lots of these guys. ASAP Bio is there. You can chuck documents at Figshare or Synodal. This is a separate thing about a manuscript that was submitted as a preprint, and where they actually mentioned the whole thing as kind of a meta thing. And of course there's institutional repositories. In Ghent we have a system called Biblio that they apparently made together with people in Finland that stores all of our manuscripts, and we can actually make them available through that system as well. So there's plenty of choice. The Open Science Framework is this logo. And remember that thing about, do you speak open science I showed you at the beginning? That was PeerJ preprints. So if you go to that manuscript, you can see what it looks like online. It looks pretty nice, this system. So now, open code then. So when it comes to your data, your paper really is the advertisement. It's about, hey, look what I did. This was pretty cool. But you can actually say that the code is the actual research. Well, the data together with the code is the research that you have performed. So the real archive of what you have done is not the paper. This is you writing about what you have done. It's like a Dear Diary thing in a scientific sense. The actual work is in the code. So there's a group, a non-profit group called NumFocus that does a lot of stuff to make code better. My group uses a lot of their tools. And one of the things I want to talk about here is Jupyter. So what is Jupyter? It is a notebook. It's an online system where every piece of code, every research is a kind of a web page where you can write blocks of code in gray in various languages. And then this code can be ran on the website. It creates the result. So in this case, it's, for instance, a very simple output. It's just this thing has been loaded. But if you make a plot, you can then show the plot, and it shows up in your page. So your entire research, the documentation, the data, the code that makes the plots that are there, it's all in one web page. And this web page you can save and share with other people. This is how my postdocs send me reports on what they do these days. They send me a Jupyter notebook. I can just scroll through it. And if you want to, you can then just change the code. You can say, yeah, but I want to see this plotted on a log scale. So you tweak the code a little bit, run it again, and you immediately get the log scale plot. This is a fantastic way to keep track of your research. It's like an electronic lab notebook for computational stuff that works extremely well. It is versioned, of course, so you can keep track of versions. And you could actually convince people that this is a paper. This is a publishable unit of information. And it's possibly much more interesting than a paper because it lives, it's alive. You can make this thing do stuff and you can tweak it. So this is really interesting. If you've never heard of this, really do have a look. My entire group runs on Jupyter Notebooks for the research bits. There's also systems that can allow you to share these codes, so third-party systems. The most popular one is GitHub. It's not just code. Remember that open science, do you speak open science manuscript? That manuscript is in GitHub. It was written on GitHub. So it's a means to archive a lot of stuff and to work collaboratively on a lot of stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do this. You can do it with Google Docs as well, as far as I'm concerned. But it is very interesting to see that these things are out there, that they exist, and they're free and easy to use. In fact, GitHub is a social system. So if you write something, be it a manuscript or being a piece of code, you write it and you put it in GitHub. People can then like it. They can say, oh, I like this project. And they can also fork it, which means that they take your project to include in their own work. And you can count these things. The system keeps track of that. And imagine going for a tenure track panel and say, well, I've written this piece of code, I've published it, it was cited 7 times, forked 40 times, and liked 150 times, so I must be doing something right. So these metrics are a very nice kind of alt metric to show people that your work has relevance. On the other hand, if you have a piece of software that has 0 forks, 0 likes, and nobody accessed it in 5 weeks, then maybe the project wasn't that interesting after all. Or you may be very well ahead of the curve. Another thing is that once people then take the data, they can reprocess all your results with it because they have the code, and they can tweak it and maybe do new stuff with it. And if there should be any issues, because nobody's ever written a sufficiently complex piece of code without bugs, then they can fork it with, they can do a pull request, and then they can go and fix issues. They can say, but this particular thing, you forgot the decimal point here. So they can go into the code, fix it, and then they can send you a fixed version that you can merge into the main version. So you can work collaboratively, even with people you don't know. So this happens for our software, where suddenly out of nowhere, somebody says, I added this function to your software. Can you merge it into your software tree? It's really cool when that happens, because that too you can quote. You can say, we have people voluntarily contributing to our software. It must be pretty great. Now about the licenses for open source code, it's quite simple. There are 3 main ones. One is like the public domain license, MIT. It says, I couldn't really care less about it. Here's my code, do what you want. It's very open. The second one is the one that my group uses, which is Apache 2. It's very much like a Creative Commons attribution. So the buy, it says you can do whatever you want, even sell it, reuse it, but you can never claim you made it. You have to cite us as the original authors. I've had one case where a PhD student of a colleague of mine copied literally a bunch of our code and put his name over it. So then I had to write a cease and desist letter because he was violating the terms. And then there's GNU GPL, which is the BYSA, the share alike. If you put anything in GPL and somebody else uses it, you now have to make your code GPL as well. So it's the infectious one. So I had a question earlier, can you change this afterwards? Yes, you can. I did it for my code. It used to be GPL. I moved to Apache 2 after seeing the light. And what I had to do was I had to get written permission from everyone who had ever contributed to the code. You need to have unanimous permission to change the license. That was easy because it was me and a master student at the time. I was young. Today, that would be an enormous endeavor. So think about the license before you start, especially if there's more than 2 people going to work on this code, because it's going to be very difficult to track everyone after a while. And if one person dissents because they have a bad day or because they don't like you or for whatever reason, then you can't change it anymore. So it's tricky. If you don't want any of these 3 very typical, very well-known, very solid licenses, there's a lot more choices out there. But to be honest, I don't see why you would want anything else than these 3, which is do whatever you like but cite me, and this is do whatever you like, but then I should be able to do whatever I like with yours. That's essentially the essence. Okay, open peer review, 2 slides and I'm done with this. You may know this girl, Paola Masuzzo. She's the postdoc who helped me write this other thing. She co-wrote a really exciting manuscript on multidisciplinary perspective on emergent and future innovations in peer review. And as the title says, every time you get a rejection from your paper, you should read this. It will look very, very appealing to you. But there's really cool stuff happening in peer review. People are really thinking about new ways of getting this organized, but there are some caveats. So without going into the details, one of the big issues with open peer review is that people want the reviewers' names to be known. Now, if I were a PhD student, I wouldn't write a nasty review to a big shot in my field. Not with my name under it, because they will torpedo me. These egos, you know, they just cannot handle it. I know how much they shouted at me for making them data public. Imagine how much they would shout if you tell them to reject the paper. So that is really a big problem, especially since junior researchers are the ones who do the reviewing. It's not the senior people anymore. The other problem is that post-publication review, this kind of stuff you see online and stuff like peers and other systems, is predominantly negative. Nobody goes online to say, hey, this was a fantastic paper, I really enjoyed reading this. No, they go online to say that this paper contains the following errors. And to be honest, that is a little bit annoying, because you would sometimes like to read somebody saying, hey, this was fantastic, I really like that paper. Keep up the good work. But somehow we are strange animals and we never do that. Peer reviewing is also wasted time as far as universities go, because you get 0 credit for it. You cannot put it on your CV. People do say, I have reviewed for this journal, but then, to be honest, that doesn't really actually get any traction. So that's something that needs to be worked on, and the paper that I quoted just now contains some ideas on how you could do that. I've always asked journal editors, every journal editor I come across, I ask this question. Suppose somebody writes a really, really, really nasty review for whatever reason, and I want to make a blog post about it. Can I copy-paste the review in my blog post? Who owns the copyright? And then the editors just tell me, we don't know. I think that's really scary. These are professional editors, paid editors for journals, and I have no idea whether I can do that or not. I've had a few that I would like to publish. This is a gray zone right now. So if there are any lawyers in the room, you can write a manuscript about this. I think it will be interesting legal precedent. Now, in the end, I think that open peer review, at least being able to read anonymous reviews, is super, super useful. Because why would we keep this behind lock and key? Is it so that the editors can do whatever they want? I mean, what harm is there in seeing other people's comments about the paper, and maybe even interacting with these comments, saying, yeah, this comment is actually not that bad, so if you continue on that line of reasoning, you could do so and so and so, we could have a discussion online. I wouldn't mind all the reviews for my papers to go online, even the rejected ones, right? Because people can then see how unfairly they were rejected, of course. Okay, final slide. Remember the dragon? The dragon is gone, or is quickly trying to hide. There is treasure there. There's a lot of stuff out there. The question for you is, what will you do? How will you contribute? And how will you benefit from all of this stuff that is now out there, and you can just get it from the web? So that is really where we should be thinking. We should know what to do with this new opportunity. Because if we don't, everybody will come back to us and say, so why did we do open science again? And I just have to thank my group, and especially this is Paula, who's been mentioned several times. She gets a big orange box because she really hates that. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lennart. This was really a very impressive talk, and you may have seen that we have put your title of the article, You Speak Open Science, as the title of this event, because we were very fascinated when we started talking about linking up the PhD Welcome Day with an open science session, that this article was somehow including all of our questions on open science. We were very much more informed when we were reading it. Before we had a lot of questions, and it is very structured, so we would recommend, if you haven't read it yet, you should read it. Thank you very much. Yeah, that was a good. Thanks. So, and also I wanted to mention that your own CV shows probably, and you might perhaps respond to that if you're there later in the break, that there is an entire world out of opportunities if you engage in open science. So the theme actually is now coming up, and if you as PhD students or also researchers of all other kind of levels engage in it, I think opportunities will rise very much in the future. So now I want to introduce Professor Conchita D'Ambrosio, who joined the University of Luxembourg in 2013 as a professor of economics, and she obtained one of our FNR prestigious Pearl grants to set up a group here. And she was before associate professor of economics at Milano Bicocca, if I pronounce that right, and she did her PhD at the University of New York before she was doing her studies in Milano Bocconi. And her research mainly focuses on income and wealth distribution and social exclusion. Since 2008, she has been the managing editor of the Review of Income and Wealth. So Conchita is one of the economic professors who has extended her discipline towards other social sciences fields, and she's very much interested in interactions between economics and inequality and wealth. And so in her talk, Open in Order to Fight Inequality, she will let us know how she will give us several examples of projects, how economic inequality is analyzed using data repositories which are open to students and researchers worldwide. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks. So I am a social scientist. How many of you are social scientists in the room? A minority. Okay. So our world is a little bit different from what we saw before. And in my presentation, I'm going to share with you my experience. And it's also going to be a video presentation where you will see the point of view of the pioneers of open science in my field. And if we think about the way social scientists work, we do research, we publish research, and we communicate research. And those little phases is with respect to open access of that stage of our research. We do pretty well in doing research. We do pretty bad in publishing research, and we do pretty well in communicating research. So let me start with the bad part, so that's over, and then we continue with what's not so bad in our field. Published research, the working papers, which is similar to the preprints, are open access. We just publish a lot when we think our paper is at a good stage. We just publish it in a working paper series. They appear online and freely downloadable, and they're also distributed with newsletters to members of associations and other things. There are a few open access peer-reviewed journals, but in social sciences they're not pretty good. So you do not send your paper there. You tend to use those publishers that make a lot of money, and I confirm that they do a lot of, they really become rich with our publications. And so peer-reviewed international journals in social sciences are not open access. You can pay with the gold open access, which is around $2,000 per article. And if you're a researcher that has to use its own research funds for that, you think twice about it. There are alternatives, like if your article is in a special issue that is after a conference organized, for example, by the United Nations World Institute for Development Economic Research, then they pay open access to the whole special issue. They have a discount on the $2,000, and then the whole issue is open access. And very often publishers, to advertise the journal, they let the first issue of the year be open access. So there is something open access, even in journals that are not entirely open access. And economists don't publish a lot of books. Other social scientists do a little bit more, but books are not open access. Again, you have to pay and you have to buy the book. And you have few previews on Google's on the books, but then you jump pages and you can't really see the entire book over there. When we do research, we do much better. There are open data sets and non-open data sets. There is open software non-open software, and often we use a lot of internet to start our research, and there you have a lot of open resources. And if I want to speak a little bit about my own research, I'm an economist and I'm interested in the measurement of individual and social well-being, the determinant of it, and the consequences on human behavior. And one of the main topics, as you heard, of my research is economic inequality, which is differences in command of economic resources among individuals within a country and among countries. And the data set we use are a little bit different from the data set that we heard in the previous presentation, because to, for example, study economic inequality, I need to have access to data of an entire society. I need to have access to detailed information on as many individuals as possible. And the data is improved considerably if the same individual is observed in as many years as possible. For example, I would like to know, to observe, to have information on the entire life of an individual from the time when an individual is born to its death. And I want to know basically everything, not only demographic facts, but also social facts, economic aspects of the life of an individual. And nowadays, we would even like to know have information about the genes of these individuals and the epigenetic factors that happens to the life. So you can imagine that we really, really want to know a lot about this, about the society. And there are two very successful examples of open data. One is SUP and the other one is LIS. And we are going to spend a little bit of time on these two sources of the research that social scientists do. SUP and LIS are different data sets. The SUP is a longitudinal data set on one country. So you observe the same individual over time in Germany. And LIS instead is based here in Luxembourg, is the Luxembourg income study. It's a cross-section, but you're able to observe different countries over time. So if you have the same, if you observe the individuals in different waves are not the same. So they're not re-interviewed, but there is a change in the data in the sample each time the data is in each year. And also the big difference between SUP and LIS, and I'm going to show you some videos on them, is that with SUP you get the data, you download the data, and the data is with you. Of course, you have to sign some confidentiality forms before having access to the data. While for LIS you don't get the data, but there is a remote system that allows you to have access to this data and to let the system run your results and you get them back to you. And SUP is the data set I use the most. It's the German socioeconomic panel. I use it more than LIS because I like the fact I'm interested in events, in what happens over a life of an individual. So I need to have information of the same individual over time. And the SUP data are distributed free of charge through the Research Data Center of the SUP. And it can only be used for scientific research purposes. You are required to sign a data distribution contract, and then you receive the data in an anonymized form. And as researchers, we're really not interested in knowing exactly who the person is. We want to know everything about that person, but we're not interested in identifying exactly the person. And this is an excellent open data. It is an outstanding project. And I want to share with you the video of the SUP family. So this is the website of the SUP, which is actually at the Deutsches Institut für Wirtschaftsforschung in Berlin. And here they are. The sound. Sorry, they were here.
And fears.
Okay.
What personal and living in Germany. What issues matter most to the people living in Germany? What are living conditions like for individuals and their families? What are people's hopes and fears? What personal and professional experiences have shaped their lives? And how is German society evolving? The Socioeconomic Panel study provides answers to all these questions.
We collected the first wave of the SOEP in '84, but there was a long time of work behind us. In '71 we started the cooperation between sociologists and economists. In '79 we started the preparation of the panel, and in '82 finally at the third application we got the final decision. The decision was very difficult. We had to learn, we on our side, but also the evaluators. But our concept was new and revolutionary. We wanted to have longitudinal data, but there was no experience with these data. We wanted to combine economic and social data, and we wanted to include foreigners, which was quite new in Germany at this time. And we wanted a lot of money. But we were modest. On the other side, we had only a perspective of 5 years. Now it has been 30 years.
Today, the Socioeconomic Panel study surveys over 21,000 adults and their family members every year. In some of these families, there are already 3 generations participating. And more than 2,000 of our respondents have been part of the study for over 30 years. This makes the Socioeconomic Panel the oldest and largest longitudinal study in the world, a source of tremendously valuable information for researchers.
My name is Martin Kroh. I'm responsible for all aspects of survey methodology.
My name is Ingrid Tucci. I do research on immigrants in Germany.
I'm Katharina Spies, and my research focuses on early education and family policy.
My name is Peter Krause. I'm in charge of data administration. My research focuses on living conditions, inequality and quality of life.
I'm Simone Bartsch, and I compile the questionnaire that over 21,000 people throughout Germany answer every year.
I'm Michaela Engelmann, and I'm the voice behind the SOEP hotline. The most frequent question is, when is the new data available?
My name is Marco Gieselmann. My job at the SOEP is to direct SOEP Campus. In this program, we offer workshops in how to use the data.
I'm Elke Holst, and I analyze questions surrounding women and men's labor market participation.
I took over as director of the SOEP study shortly before the Berlin Wall came down. Of course, the fall of the wall surprised us as much as everyone else. But we did not let this historic moment slip away. We reacted immediately, and 4 months before German unification, we had already surveyed a new SOEP sample of over 2,000 households with almost 4,500 respondents living in them, in what was then still the GDR.
We are often talking about the SOEP family, and we are a big family. More than 500 researchers worldwide from Berlin to Australia are using the data. We have the joint interest of analyzing social change in Germany from the perspective of the families living in Germany, either from a psychological, political, sociological, or economic perspective.
Parental wealth affects children's success. East German couples have children. West German couples think about it. Satisfaction with life declines 5 years prior to death. Unfair pay leads to adverse health effects. Artists are poor but happy.
We want to double the number of households in our survey to nearly 20,000. Our focus now is to motivate more immigrants and their families to participate in our survey. Besides this, we will incorporate new survey methodologies for further improvement of our data.
So I was in the picture before. It was a little one. I'm not sure you could see me, but I was just over there in the little corner down there. Now, this is, because this data is open, we are all studying the German society. And for me, really, Germany is an example of European Union countries. It's not that I'm really interested in Germany, but the data is there. It's a great data. It's open, accessible, so it's the best available, and we all use it. And you can really do a lot of things with this data set. You can study a lot of different aspects, as you saw, of the 20 million Germans that are there. And of course, they made sure that privacy is guaranteed, so no one is really able to identify the individual in that data set. Another very interesting example is the Luxembourg income study. And the list is not really a data set, it's a data archive and a research center dedicated to cross-national analysis. And the main office of LIS is here, is just next door in the Maison des Sciences Humaines on the 5th floor. And LIS has also a satellite office at the City University in New York. It's home of two different databases. One is the Luxembourg Income Study database, which is the largest income database of harmonized microdata collected from about 50 countries all over the world, and also the Luxembourg Wealth Study, which is a younger and a smaller database, and it's the only cross-national wealth microdatabase in existence. And LIS is open to students and researchers. You cannot use the data for commercial use, once again, you can only just do research with those. And students have access to the data for free upon registration. Instead, if you're a researcher, it depends if the country of affiliation is a financial contributor to LIS or not. And because of LIS, every researcher in my field knows about Luxembourg. So whenever I go there and say, you are from the Luxembourg Income Study, I say, no, really, I'm from the university. I am also a member of LIS, but that's not my main affiliation. And LIS was founded in Luxembourg in 1983. I want to show you parts of this video of the intentions and the vision of the founders. The video is pretty long, so we're just going to skip parts. And we start with what the current director of the National Statistical Institute of Luxembourg, Serge Allegressa, has to say about this project. So this is the website of LIS. And here we go. We want to go to 7. Here they are. So sorry. Here.
In 1983, 2 planning meetings to design the LIS project were held in Luxembourg. The first one took place in April. Tim Smeating traveled to Luxembourg for the first time to attend that meeting. A second planning meeting was held that August.
I wasn't quite sure where Luxembourg was. I knew it was small. I think I knew it was a country and not a city, but wasn't too sure. And the idea that there was a research center there and there was a whole group of people interested in this stuff was okay. Now, if we're in the 21st century and I could have Googled it, I might not have even got on a plane. But on April 4th, 1983, I got off a plane in Luxembourg, took the train out to Walferdang, walked across the train tracks and there was somebody there looking for me. Now this was, you couldn't send an email to say that they canceled the plane yesterday, so it was a day later, but Gaston had sent Mr. Creer, his aide-de-camp, out looking for me to see if I was on the train, and sure enough I was.
And then the next meet.
Let's go forward.
That differences are real differences and not just artifacts.
It was the first time I heard about it. Luxembourg income study. We really didn't understand what it looked like. And at that time, Mr. Gaston Chambers, the director of CPS, tried to explain to me that it was putting up a kind of a huge data bank with individual data on household and income. And it was really funny. It sounded very funny to me because I thought this kind of thing should exist already. And I was very surprised to discover that this was something which had to be built, had to be constructed by researchers. And if you make it on a comparative way, if you want to compare data of various countries during time, then you have to put all this data together. And I found this project very, very exciting, and I was asked that if I would agree that I could join this team as a researcher.
The original idea, and the idea all ever since, was to build a database that lots of people could use. To some extent, in my mind, that was influenced by the fact that in the US we were moving toward requirements by funders that people who worked with data had to make that data available to other researchers. This was just the idea from the beginning, you make it available. That's why sometimes I call it a data utility, that anyone can use for whatever purpose is appropriate with the data. And people kind of like that.
So I think that it was always very exciting for me to work with the LIS team, and especially with Tim, because he had very bright ideas and he knew exactly where he wanted to go, and he was even capable to motivate us and to make the work very, very exciting. And I must say that knowing that we had these conferences, international conferences, where all the papers have been presented and discussed was something quite new, even for Luxembourg. We must admit that at that time, which is, I think, today everything changed in this field. We have a university, we have research centers, but you must imagine that at that time, except the SEPS, which was a non-profit organization at the time, it became only later, it became an institute, and publicly recognized institute supported by government. So this was a very important contribution, and Tim's meeting, Lee Raynaud, was highly recognized even by our policymakers. I must say that we were very lucky with Mr. Santerre, the Prime Minister at that time, because he was naturally someone who was ready to support this kind of projects. But the institutions were not ready to do it. And so it was quite an achievement to convince other decision makers in Luxembourg to support this project.
LIS is primarily known for its substantive contribution, harmonizing cross-national microdata and making them available for research. Equally important in LIS's legacy was the invention of the remote access system known as LISI. LISI revolutionized the way that social scientists carried out research using the LIS data. The LISI system enabled researchers to analyze the microdata while working in their home offices around the world. Starting in 1983, Tim Smeeding worked closely with Gunter Schmaus at SEPS. Gunter played a crucial role in helping researchers to perform analyses using the harmonized data. Between 1986 and 1989, Marc Sigrand and Minna de Wong, both working at CEPS, and John Coder, on loan from the U.S. Census Bureau, joined the LIS project. Together, they built LISI, which is now in its 8th generation.
The way that people got the data originally from LIS is Gunther would make all the runs. According to what I told him, that was it, full stop. And we shipped the runs and the tables and the output to people. That's the way it was at first. But we knew that a system whereby people would send in a request for a run, some LIS person would make the run and send it back to them, didn't work with the way the world was changing. So Lee Rainwater, sitting on the 4th floor in his office in William James Hall, sent his programs upstairs to the 11th floor to be run. And he said, and he used something called BitNet. And he said, if I can send them to the 11th floor, why can't I send them to Luxembourg and have them run there? That'd be great, but we need a system that's got to deal with this. So then we were in a pickle because John was still there at this point, and we realized we had to have access for everybody, and that was a big selling point. And John had met this guy who was a Luxembourger named Marc Sigrand. He was in the next office, and he was doing brain research or something. Mark and John got to be good friends, and they together built this remote access system called LISI. And the idea was that they had to protect the data. The important thing was nobody could compromise confidentiality. The reason we were in Luxembourg, you have to remember, is they had the strongest data protection laws in the world.
I started to work in '86 in Luxembourg for the CEPS Institute. I had to meet people at that time that were there, like Tim Smeding and Lee Rainwater, and I especially got in contact with it the second year I was working there in '87, when they wanted to make a new system for accessing the Luxembourg income study data, which I think at that time were 7 countries, 6 or 7 countries. In fact, at that time, one of the contributions that Luxembourg made to the project, which was in fact a very big contribution, was to give us free access at the state computer, which is called the Centre Informatique d'État, where we had access to their mainframe. And as at that time the storage capacities were still a very big issue, there was a company, I don't remember the name of the company, but one person that worked there was Günther Schmaus, who had developed a special system that had as purpose to zip the files, to compress the files in a way that they could be stored, so that there was access given to these data files, but only manually. People submitting jobs at the time had to send in a letter or whatever mean, just telling Günther Schmaus what he had to key in, get the listing out, put it in a good old-fashioned envelope and send it by standard mail back to the people. That was the first, in fact, what we would call LISI 1 at that time. So a pure manual system, and the data stored on the mainframe of the State Computer Center.
So you saw the excitement of these people and the big contribution that Luxembourg had on open access data in my field of research, giving access to the computer center of the state for that. Now we are past that stage, but a lot still happening over here. Now, another part which is pretty open access is the third pillar of the way researchers work, and it's communication. And again, as social scientists, because you work with humans, that's your sample, you want to communicate your results to them so that they can take action. And they can, I don't know, if you're interested in decreasing inequality, you want them to understand what inequality is, how it is generated, and what they can do to decrease inequality. Also, you want to have a more knowledgeable society so that when, for example, they go to vote, they understand what policymakers say and they can vote for one instead of the other. So in Luxembourg, We have two projects that are here to inform the general public, to inform policymakers, and to inform also researchers about economic inequality. And one project is Inequality End Lectures that we started in 2013 upon my arrival, and it's a project that regularly takes place. And another one is the October Days for Sustainable Development. As the word says, it's the October Days, so it takes place only in October, and we just had the third edition last week. And with the Inequality End Lectures, that is also sponsored by a program of the Fonds National de la Recherche, the RESCOM initiative, with Inequality, we are able to invite top scholars to present their research in an easy and accessible way. The lectures are open and they're free, and have become a regular event for an average of 90 people per lecture. And we, thanks to our media colleagues that are, I saw Alexander around here, so thanks to Alexander, Christophe, Sasha, we film the lectures and we post the videos on the website of the lectures, and they're available to everyone. And we also record the lecture in a nutshell, which is just a short summary of what the researcher is going to say in the entire lecture, because then you can decide if you want to start with the 5 minutes and then you move on if you're interested in following the entire lectures. And these are the lectures. This is the website of the lectures. We are going to host the 15th of November, the chief statistician of the OECD, Martin Durand, to talk about the Better Life Initiative at the OECD level. And I want to show you some of, again, my video presentation, some of the short 5 minutes that I thought came out particularly nice. The first is by François Bourguignon, who was the former chief economist of the World Bank. His lecture is, oh, it worked before.
Good morning. I am François Bourguignon. I am emeritus professor at the Paris School of Economics. And I will be giving a lecture, the title of which is Inequality and Inequity. Now, you might think that this is exactly the same thing, that the lecture could have been entitled Inequality and Inequality. The point is that what is behind inequity is a concept of inequality which is somewhat different from the one which is commonly used. It refers to the inequality of opportunity rather than to the inequality of what we call outcomes, that is earnings, income, standard of living, etc., which is a result of economic activity. Inequality of opportunity refers to the circumstances or the assets that people are endowed with in order to function in the economic sphere and in order to generate some income at the end. So, for example, it may be the education of the people which they received when they were in their youth. It may be the land or the housing they inherited from their parents. It may be the social background they were raised into, all these things. It may also be the individual trait. The gender matters because if there is some discrimination on the labor market, depending on your gender, you'll have different results in terms of earnings. So the point behind inequality of opportunity is really to measure the inequality which is being born at that stage of the life cycle of people. And then you see that this may lead different results. The inequality of earnings is including part of the inequality of opportunity, but in addition, there are other components like the efforts that people put into their work, the training that they got during their career, etc. So this is the difference between the two types of inequality. Now, why does it matter? It matters from an ethical point of view, because you might say that people are responsible for the efforts they make in their job. They are not responsible for the education that they got from their parents. They are not responsible for having been born in a wealthy family or in a poor family. Then, because of that, we may not want to correct inequalities in the same way if we deal with inequality of outcomes or if we deal with inequality of opportunity. And the lecture will be a discussion of that, where I will conclude that practically the policies against inequality must combine instruments that correct outcomes, but also instruments that can compensate the inequality of opportunity. And so this is a kind of enlarged view of inequality when we compare to a standard analysis of inequality of income or earnings.
Just the last one. So it's, where is she? Let me go. You see we have a big collection. A woman now.
My name is Ariel Khalil, and I am a professor at the University of Chicago in the United States. And my work is concerned with the fact that economically advantaged and disadvantaged children experience very different opportunities to fulfill their human potential. I'm especially interested in how parents promote children's learning and development, especially in the early years. And I'm trying to solve the puzzle of why educated and economically advantaged parents interact with their children in ways that are very different from the ways that economically disadvantaged parents interact with their children. We see substantial inequality in children's exposure to high-quality learning environments in the home from a very early age. I'm interested in understanding this phenomenon and also in trying to devise new ways of promoting more optimal parent-child interaction. And I'm interested in trying to help parents meet the goals they have for their children's positive development and support them in developing habits that will instill cognitive skills and non-cognitive skills in their young children to set them on a course for successful development over their lifetime.
Okay, so you saw all of this is our contribution to knowledge by disseminating and inviting all of these people over there to talk. Now, there is another project, and then I will conclude with that, which is the October Days for Sustainable Development. As you may have heard, all the countries, they are committed to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 with the 2030 Agenda of the United Nations. And we dedicated 3 Octobers to the discussion of some aspects of sustainable development. We just came from the last October Days, and this year we hired a cartoonist. She was just there designing a big sheet with what she understood. And of the discussion, and we have 4 of these because we had 4 sessions, and each session had one of these big cartoons, and we are planning for the moment they are on display at the European Investment Bank, which is one of our main partners in the organization of the events, but they're going to come to the lobby of probably the Maison des Sciences Humaines here in Belval. And we had 4 panels. This was the first. This session was dedicated to business and SDGs. So the first was, can SDG create value for the enterprises? This is the posters and the 4 panelists with Aline Müller from CEPS. Before it was CEPS, but CEPS now is LISER. If by any chance you wonder what happened to the research institute we heard in the video about Liz, is currently LISER. So she is the director of LISER, and she was the moderator of that panel. The second panel was, how can companies redesign production pattern to implement the SDGs? So here is the moderator and the 5 speakers, and behind the poster. The third panel, how can we foster awareness capacity development in the business world? And this is the 5th panel on how can we monitor progress towards the achievement of the SDGs with, again, the poster and the panelists. And behind these activities, this is some of the team members behind it. It's a big project that has involved a lot of institutions in Luxembourg, not only the university, the European Investment Bank with the Institute, which is the part more devoted to the common goods of the European Investment Bank. And we have collaborations with the LISER, with Statec, the National Statistical Institute, with Caritas sometimes, and with the Economist Club of Luxembourg, the European Commission. So it's really a joint project that we are carrying. And I want just to conclude to say that you will have challenges in your life of researchers, but as you saw from the videos of those people, you may need to fight. You may need to have to convince the administration that sometimes your idea is good, and even if it's, you think it's revolutionary, you just have to go for it. And I think that you need to speak open science, that hidden science is not useful, and it will definitely not improve our world. Thank you.
Many thanks, Conchita. I think it gave us a wonderful view on the variety of issues around open science, and even if there are such different things in biomedicine, informatics, and then in economics and social sciences, I found that there are some overlaps, and one is that actually if you have an idea and you work on it, you may be the pioneers driving these things, like a lot in the world of open science are nowadays not necessarily in the center of the concerns, as you mentioned, Lennart, that people do not really care about the quality of their data, they do not really finalize their encoding very consciously. And I think that those who do and who make an effort as scientists and who bring these things further, at a certain moment there is an advantage that is gained out of it, because it's about the quality and the sharing between scientists that makes the difference. Okay, I open the floor now for discussions. So do you have any questions?
You need to stay here and ask.
Sorry, please say your name and where you are from.
Yes. Hello. Yeah. So I'm Maël Guénou. I'm working at LIST just next door in material science. And so this is a question maybe for the first speaker. So you have mentioned this interesting example on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I find terrible in the sense that it's a private foundation taking this kind of initiative. Do you have any comment on the stereotypity of governments, because ultimately the first funders or funding agencies are usually from taxpayers, and they should be the one taking this kind of radical solutions. Can you comment on what is hindering that? What are the locks that should be addressed?
Okay, straight into the minefield. I have to be careful what I say now, but I have this tendency to speak my mind, right? This does not always work well. First and foremost, we have to keep in mind that a company that makes profits, that has a profit margin of 36%, is going to do anything in its power to keep that productivity, to keep that profitability. So lobbying is an extremely important aspect of what these companies do. And they spend an inordinate amount of time, effort and money in trying to change the minds of politicians away from this whole open science thing and away from this, this idea that maybe they should not be publishing in these journals. That's one thing. There's a clear economic impact. This is why you see this, probably why you see this from a private funder, because Bill Gates does not care about this. He cannot be bought. He's doing this as a massive tax evasion scheme, which actually benefits science, so as far as I'm concerned, he's allowed. And he doesn't care. He cares about outcomes. And so that's one. Second thing is, don't forget that governments have a really nasty job. They have to somehow prove the usefulness of the money they spend on science. It's a luxury to spend money on science rather than on housing or on sewage or on whatever. And so the point is that they measure in a certain way. And so VIB, the institute I belong to, gets from the Belgian finance ministry key performance indicators, which have to do with economic output, so we have to do translational stuff, but it also has to do with how many papers we publish at what impact factors. So these things have been around for a very long time, and then governments are necessarily a little bit conservative when it comes to changing their ways, especially in metrics. So they're not likely to go and say, you cannot publish in high impact factor journals anymore, because that would contradict the kind of performance indicators they put on people to publish in high impact factor journals. So if we want to change that, I think it takes quite a bit of lobbying from the research community, where we say, no, we should be looking at how open are you as a metric as well. And if that becomes a valid metric, and it becomes a more important metric over time than the impact factor of the journals, then you have paved the way into getting that out of the way. So I think there's two paths that currently prevent governments. Having said that, the European Commission is really strongly moving in the direction of openness, and they will drag a lot of people along in their wake. We see in Germany universities banding together against the publishers, so they say we stop having subscriptions to Elsevier journals, tough luck. And so in the Netherlands there's a very strong push. So essentially it boils down to making a counter lobby of researchers who say maybe we shouldn't be blinded by impact factor, and maybe we should think about how we spend public money. So that was a pretty long answer, but it was a complex question, and so I hope that helps.
I'm just going to jump straight in. I would have hundreds of questions for you. I'm Emma Szymanski, I'm at LCSB. So I just actually switched to Luxembourg from EOWAG, and our library had a different definition of green and gold publishing to what you used. So our library made a conscious, so we're part of the ETH, but not part of the ETH. It was a library just for 4 research institutes that branched off the ETH. They supported us if we chose to do gold open access, and gold open access being your open access paper was in an open access journal. So not the definition that you used where this is only partial. This is what they called green, and they said we would never support that because we pay it twice. But what they defined as gold is make sure it is completely and utterly open. And if we didn't have money to do that, they would pay for us, which I thought was fantastic. And another thing we've heard from the EU is, actually at least within our environmental world, is that the EU are now considering giving concessions on reporting, so that if you are going to make your data openly available, you will actually get less reporting requirements as a reward for doing that. And things like this, initiatives or incentives for people to take care of their data and actually have a gain of it, I think this is actually going to be really important to getting more data out there and getting more researchers aware of what this is doing.
I love that last bit. Essentially what these, what happens is you exchange open data for trust. I think that's an extremely fair, extremely logical, extremely worthwhile exchange. I'm going to steal that idea. I'm going to promote that in Belgium from now on. As to the open access of ETH, that makes perfect sense, right? I did make this distinction at some point that, you know, the payment twice only works for journals that also collect subscription fees. Mind you, you can go one step further. And so the Wellcome Trust has done that together with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They have founded and funded a journal that is only open access, eLife. but it's ridiculously cheap to publish it. And that's because they fund it, and they essentially said, instead of paying money to all of these journals, even the ones that are fully open access, some of them still charge quite a bit of money per paper. They said we can use the same amount of money and run our own journal. So people go even that far. In terms of business concepts, PeerJ has a very interesting one, where you pay $99 per author on the paper. So they built a business model on the fact that papers tend to have multiple authors these days. And you can get a for life subscription, so then as an author you never have to pay again for 258 euros or something. So I took out one of these actually. Never really published in PeerJ, but I thought it was a great idea, so I spent, my wife was not happy, but I spent 260 euros on this. Yeah.
Hi, my name is András Sarkman. I'm from CSB, and yeah, my question is also to you. We talk a lot, or you were talking a lot about open science, but what I like to see is not only openness, but it's free in terms of free software. And I don't know how this is done in the open world or open community, or can we actually do something like free in terms of science as well?
Yeah, so for a bit of background for people who are not familiar with this dichotomy in the software world, originally there was Richard Stallman with the Free Software Foundation, who believes that software should be free as in free speech, right? So you should be able to do whatever you like, and then you should be able to make sure that other people then need to adhere to the same kind of rules. This is this infectiousness of the GPL license. If I give you something for free, you must give it to other people for free as well. So that is the free world. Then you have the open world. This is in software is open source, and the Apache license, an example of that. I give my code to you, but you can then build something on top of that and make that private. That's fine. I don't care. So these two, they have a different philosophy, and I think that's what you're getting at to some extent, right?
Yeah. I think
and then in science, can we do the same?
Yes, I think that generally when I publish something, I give it to the community. So whenever you build something on the top of it, you should also give it back to the community. So
this is quite literally
kind of fairness of both with software, both with science and data and
So in software you license a GPL and you have that. And then you can choose whether you want to support patents or not with GPL 2 or GPL 3. And in other documents, in other documents you use either the Creative Commons attribution or the Creative Commons attribution share alike, which was not invented out of thin air. It's a literal copy of the free and open source paradigms. So these two allow you to do, and the MIT is another version of Apache too. So these things exist, and you can do that. So you can make your manuscript or your paper CC BY SA, which means that if somebody does text mining on your paper, they then have to make the results of their text mining also share alike. They also have to make it CC BY SA. So there are ways of enforcing this even there. Yeah.
Maybe if there are no other questions, we can also say a few words about our own policy. So I'm in the research fund, and my colleague is there, Michel Weber. A lot of you will have the opportunity to publish under our guidelines, because if you are FNR funded, we have also new guidelines on open access. And maybe, Mich, you can say a few words about it. At least this open access fund is relatively recent, and we will have a first round of institutional updates where there is a kind of inventory that the institutions will make, and on the basis of the institutional lists, the FNR will pay the publications. And maybe, Mich, you can say something about the conditions of that open access fund.
Yes, so the FNR has literally this year, with some delay comparison to other funding agencies, introduced an open access policy, introducing a mandate for all projects funded with funding decisions after 1st of January. They have to publish their research results in open access. And as of that 1st of January, it is also no longer possible for researchers to apply for money upfront to cover publication fees or fees associated with publications. Instead, we are introducing, as of next year, a so-called open access fund, which is there to cover article processing charges associated with publishing articles in open access. And there are some conditions that need to be fulfilled to get that money. And at the moment, we will provide money both for articles published in gold open access, so that's open access that are fully, journals that are fully open access. And we will, subject to availability of budget, also currently still support publication in hybrid mode, which is a standard journal like Nature, where you pay an additional fee to get the article published in open access. If you choose either of those options, you are still required to also deposit a copy of your article in a repository. So if you choose a repository-only option, obviously then that's already fulfilled. But the full details are available on the FNR website, and there's also a flyer outside, and I'm here afterwards if you have questions. And this applies also to PhD students' work. So all FNR programs are open to this open access fund. And the application will be done by the institution, not by individual researchers. So it's the institution asking collectively for a refund of open access fees.
So, hello, I'm Beth Park from the library, and I'm responsible for the Orbilu repository. Some of you heard this maybe in the first part. So at the university, we also have a mandate for deposit in our repository, that anything that is published in a peer-reviewed journal must be deposited in the repository. We do not require open access due to limitations with the publishers, but we do encourage it. And we also provide advice to anyone at the university to help determine what their rights are with respect to where they've published and what they can do with their articles after it's been published. From an OpenAIRE point of view, we also, with my colleague Jonathan, we're also the National Open Access Desk for the OpenAIRE project, which means that we support any questions that you have regarding open access linked to your Horizon 2020 funding. So if you want to know what the rules are or where you can publish or etc., you can contact us on the Orbilu website or Orbilu email address, which is orbilu@uni.lu. And Jonathan will be available afterwards, and he has the really bright orange t-shirt here, so.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So in that regard, we can close this session, and I want to thank everybody, in particular the speakers of this session, and also Tony and the organizers, Beth and Jonathan, and also the institutes that have contributed, the other institutions here in Luxembourg, including us as well, the FNR. I don't want to thank us, but I think we will continue to support this activity. And then now you are invited to join us all between until I think 7 o'clock, is that right? And then after 7 there will be a new quiz, pub quiz. And where is it? The meeting point is outside here, and we leave together at Luxdoc table. Okay, so we hope to talk to you in the break now. Thank you very much. Bye bye. Okay, it's nice that it's, you should get a registration. You could get this, actually. It's from university, so since the university is open,